Okay. Oh, we are live now. Um, Hello, everyone. I'm Jonas Nyawe. I'll be your host for today's episode. Welcome again to this new edition of the KmerAI Talks. And our guest today is Mikel Ngueajio. Hi,
AI Talks.
oh,
And our guest today
sorry.
is
There is
Mikel Ngueajio.
I,
AI.
I have an echo. Yeah, that's good now. Hi, Mikel.
Hello, can you
Yeah,
hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay,
So
awesome.
can everyone hear us online? Just checking. And someone, um, yeah, don't know if someone is online. So the way it would go is I'll present, I will introduce you quickly, and then I'll give you the floor, and you'll go through your presentation. And for those who are online or will come later, you can post your questions in the chat, in the live chat, and then at the end of the presentation I will show it in the screen and Mikel can answer them then. Yeah, so let me present her. So Mikel is a PhD student in computer science at Howard University in Washington, D.C., specialized in AI applied to natural language processing, NLP. Her research centered on the interplay between language, computation, and AI impacts on humans and society, primarily through the lens of explainable AI, hate speech, and fake news detection. Recognized as 2023-2024 TMCF HBCU Apple Scholar and an AWS Research Fellow, Mikel brings both academic excellence and industry experience to their work. She has previously interned as a data science intern at Amazon, a web development apprentice at Bloomberg, and a machine learning engineer intern at Apple. So Mikel is an active Kaggle competitor and a prolific researcher uh, with work featured in top-tier AI and HCI conferences. So Mikel has been a graduate student researcher collaborating with researchers from National Geospatial Agency, the Educational Testing Service, and Google. She has also served as a conference reviewer for Black in AI and Women in AI at NeurIPS. Today, she will be talking about a paper, Toxic Synergy Between Hate Speech and Fake News Exposure by Munjung Kim and et al. Welcome again, Mikel, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much for that great introduction. My name is Mikel Ngueajio. I am a fourth-year PhD student. I'm very happy to be here today to present on a research that is not mine, but one that I found fascinating. It's a research that studies the interplay between fake news and hate speech, and which goes in the direction in which my PhD currently is looking into. It's a research that was published earlier this year. I think it was in April 2024 by Kim and al. I would not want to butcher the name, so I would just stick with Kim from Indiana University in Bloomington, at the University of, well, Indiana University, Bloomington, and the University of Edinburgh. So let's get started. Okay. Um, Fake news and hate speech are two very interesting social phenomena that have been studied intensively over the past year. When we look at this chart, we can see that the traction for fake news and hate speech, they were not that intense before 2014. And there is one specific event in the US, I would say, that forced the increase in study for fake news and hate speech detection. And for those who follow politics, or for those who follow the news or social media, that was exactly in 2016 with the US presidential election, with President Trump or Donald Trump constantly referring to let's say, news that did not fit his agenda, or that did not look a certain way like he or they wanted, and most people in general, as fake news. And that is when most researchers like really started digging into that. It was not only the news that were not favorable to them, but also at the end of the day, some of the news that emanated from the campaign that were really misinformation, that triggered researchers to ask the question: is this really true? Is what they're saying, what they're presenting to the public, is it is the information actually correct? Is it fact checked? So how can we fact check that? How can we make sure that this information is correct? And that is when we saw the same synergy between fake news and hate speech. It really started moving forward. The research started moving forward for these two phenomena. And then following our research, so this is a current research that I have. It's currently being reviewed at the journal. I started looking into that. So maybe there is something in hate speech and fake news that keep them together. Maybe there is something about these two phenomena in society that make them synergistic. Maybe for me, it was just a hypothesis until I carried out a literature review, and then I realized that it wasn't just a hypothesis. Like Kim and all and other researchers who are currently really working on that since the beginning of the year, I realized that there is an interconnectedness between hate speech and fake news. And if you look at when you look at this diagram, we see that fake news stories, either online or offline, they generally, most often, they leverage derogatory and biased language to incite strong emotional reaction, and those strong emotional reaction in turn promote a propagation of hate speech. It could be either online or offline, and this propagation of hate speech, there are several examples around the world where we have really seen the impact of that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the slides. They generally reinforce stereotypes or some social intolerance or division or even violence, which in turn will lead to deliberate or inadvertent spread of fake news, and then the cycle goes on and on and on again. And how my work differentiated this two, like I broke this table into two to create like a mutual enhancement where fake news and hate speech, they generally mutually enhance each other, and then a bidirectional influence, like one influences the other. Either one which enhances the other, and one influences the other, and that is what I came up with. So what this research really tries to answer is the use of hate speech associated with increased exposure to fake news. So in simple terms, is the fact that I get a lot of fake news in my social media feed, or I read about a lot of fake information, push me to be a hate speaker. And you know, over the years and historically, this a few examples for over the past 10 years, we have actually had instances of where hate speech or fake news work in synergistic relation, had a synergistic relationship. Like they worked, one could either influence the other or one enhance the other. And we could see that during the pandemic, it was just so glaring, where there was an increase in anti-Asian hate. That was in 2020, where everybody that was Asian at some point, just because there was some information out there that were not possibly true about that specific population demographic, that they were the carrier of the COVID, or they were the main propagator of the COVID illness. There's also, in Sri Lanka, we saw examples of the anti-Muslim mob where misinformation spurring from social media forced people to have to start focusing on the Muslim population. Another one is one that was really interesting that came out from India. It was, this it was an instance where I believe there was false information about specific people raping other people, and then that caused a huge unsettling situation or event in India. And the list goes on and on. There have been so many other instances. Some of them have been widely broadcasted online, some of them have not. And these are some of the examples that also prompted me and other people and my colleagues to really start looking into fake news and hate speech and trying to understand, is there a synergistic relationship between that? What is there between that, between those two social instances, social incivilities that just make them work together? And that is actually what I'm currently working on my PhD. But getting back to this paper by Kim, some of the questions that they try to answer, they try to answer four questions. The first question is, are hate speakers exposed to more fake news through their following connection? So in simple terms, if I follow you and you always have fake news, and I always get my fake news from you, does it push me to be a hateful speaker? The second question is, the second, third, and fourth question, they like fall under the same umbrella, and they fall under the umbrella of, what is the relationship? Is there any relationship between fake news and hate speech exposure? And if there is, how does that, what causes that? What are the main root causes of that? What are they affected by? First, they look into the group targeted by the hate speakers. Secondly, the popularity of the fake news. And thirdly, the political orientation of the fake news. And we're going to be dissecting each and every one of these research questions with some statistics and some of the results that the authors had, to really bring this point about, this synergistic relationship between hate speech and fake news, and also looking at it from a demographics perspective and from a political perspective, and also from a popularity of the fake news perspective. So before they even got into the experimentation, they did a little bit of literature review first to test the waters. What is it about fake news? What are some perspective about fake news spreading that is out there? What have researchers been looking into when it comes to fake news spreading? First, the first thing that they came up with, well, that they found in their research, is that users generally have a high consumption for fake news. And this is corroborated by a recent research that was done by UNESCO, I think it's in September 2023, where they sampled, I think it was 18 countries from around the world, and then they had they talked to people directly to get the feel of how they feel about fake news in their political and election season. And that this point was corroborated by that, also by that study, which shows that a lot of people feel like the social media is the number one place where they get the fake news, and that daily, since more people are exposed to social media nowadays, that is the more people have a high consumption for fake news. Another observation from literature review that this paper comes up with is that user age and the number of political links is directly proportional to exposure to fake news. So what does that mean? People from a certain group, or people who follow, a certain political affiliation, or who read news from specifically a certain political affiliation, have a higher exposure to fake news. And then they even went even further to make a connection that I think they did a little study on that, on the Hillary. Well, I'm going to talk about the U.S. elections because that's what the paper is about, what mostly it talks about. That during the 2016 election, uh, fans from both aisles, they got different kind of messages, they got different kind of news. One were from mostly fake news spreader, and the other one were from people who had specific demographics, or who had specific interests, or specific political affiliations. And the third point, the third perspective on fake news spreading that came out also from the literature review is the importance of followers and connections with respect to the spreading of fake news. So what this point tries to bring home is that the number of followers you have, or the kind of followers that you have on social media, they highly influence the way the spreading of the fake news online mostly. And then now that we've done with the fake news spreading perspective, what about the hate speech perspective? What is it about it that can be a hypothesis for this study? From the hate speech perspective, some of the observation that came out from there is that hate speakers have evasive profile, and I'm pretty sure most of us, either on Facebook or Twitter or on social media, we have noticed that generally people who engage with hate speech often do not even have a profile picture. They have like evasive information in their profile. And I guess it's to not be tracked or people to not recognize them. They're just gonna hide behind their profile or hide behind that whatever blockade they may have to spew out the hate speech. And then the second observation, which might be a little bit intriguing, is that there is no such thing as a serial hater. There is nobody that just sit there, well, from what they say, there's nobody that just sits there on social media and then will constantly and exclusively spread hate speech. The third observation is that the contents, so hate speech content, they spread faster and reach a broader audience. I don't know if you're familiar with during the election season, I think in Nigeria, if I remember correctly, there was a time where Twitter was completely banned. That was because the level of misinformation and hate speech, since they travel faster than even correct news or non hate speech, it was just everywhere and it was uncontainable. That's why at some point during election seasons or not, sometimes governments take the conscious decisions to block social media in certain places. Not that is the good decision. That there's a lot of people, I don't know, from the free speech that may have a lot of things to say about that, but it's a fact. Fake news and hate speech content spread faster and they reach a broader audience. And for the fourth point, so there's a dense connection between those who spread fake news. They are generally very connected and they generally kind of know each other. It's a small group of people who know each other and then they have a dense connection between themselves. And they also not only have a dense connection between themselves, but they also have a huge number of followers. Not well, it makes sense if the fake news and the hate speech reach a broader audience, then it makes sense that these people who are spreading this fake news or hate speech will have a broader following audience. So now we get but now that we've done with the fake news and we're done with the hate speech, what about them together? What about the hate speech and the fake news? What perspective can we draw from this synergistic relationship? And one of the things that they observed was that posts containing links to low quality or low resource news outlet tend to contain more hateful language. What is low quality news? Low quality news is news that when you that that are verifiably not they're verifiably just fake. And they realize that posts containing links to those kind of news tend to have more harmful language. And then secondly, false headlines are more likely to include harmful languages. When it's wrong, generally they have to put this harmful language there or emotional thing to get people to feel something about that headline or about the story that has been propagated in that newsletter or that headline. And then thirdly, Twitter users who share links to low resource news also tend to use more harmful language. That is a study that they found, and that's a study that they use as a premise for their own research, which we're going to go into in the next slide. So, what is the methodology? For the methodology, they try to collect some data, analyze the data. They collect some data from fake news and from hate speech. And then from there, they also connect some followings because the whole premise of this, we want to study the demographics, we want to study the synergistic relationship between hate speech and fake news, but we also want to know, is it related to the number of followers that somebody has? So from a data set collection perspective, it's important to say here that the work focuses mainly on racially targeted hate speech. Hate speech comes in so many flavors, it comes in so many different genres, but they decided to focus exclusively on racially targeted hate speech. And for that, they collected two sets of data sets, which is well, three sets of data set, but here are the different sizes. This is something that I really wanted to emphasize here is that is the demographics, and we're going to see a little later why this is important. Remember, some of the research questions had to do with the demographics of the people for whom the hate speech is being targeted, or the you know who are these specific people for whom, when we have a fake news on them, there's a lot more hate speech attached to that specific population demographic. So, looking at the data set that we have currently, they broke out the data set into three, like I was said in the introduction of the methodology. First, there's this initial data set that they just went out and then they got some Twitter feeds, and then they separated. It was a lot, so I think they got about, I think it was like more than 1,000 for hate speakers and non-hate speakers, but they decided to go with the random sample, RS mean random sample of 630 users. That is the base case, that is the base number of people that they are going to be using for the user data set. And then from that user data set, they had an exposure data set. What is an exposure data set? So the 630 users have been exposed to how many people? So they are connected to how many people? They have their account. How many accounts do they follow? And then they got, for each person, they were able to get 5,000 followers because that's the maximum cap that I think Twitter puts out for when you're scraping Twitter. You have, if you want to scrape how many followers somebody has, your cap is 5,000. So that is the cap that they had. But in addition to that, they also followed tweets like, excuse me, the tweeters for the next 100 years. They got all the tweets for the first 100 years, or the a gap of 100 years for those 5,000 speakers, for those 5,000 followers. And this is a massive. This is the amount of posts that they were able to get from this for this exposure data set. And then now that we have an exposure data set, we have a user data set from which we're able to get some followers. What are the kind of tweets that they did that these followers connected with over the past 100 years? Now we have to verify the posts. And how the way they did that was that post credibility. If a post was associated with any news article, they would go into NewsGuard. I don't know if anybody is familiar with NewsGuard, but I think it's this database of news articles where would the news article are graded for credibility or not, and then they have a threshold and have a score to say, okay, this article is very credible, this article is not so credible, or this article is just fake. So they use NewsGuard for the post credibility data set. And then they use a credibility threshold of 60%. So everything after 60%, like from 60% to 100%, they for them, oops, 60% to above was considered high credibility, and anything below 60% was considered low credibility news. And then here is some of the results that they had. So when we look at the number of following, we see that since the threshold was 5,000, we see that a lot of people actually had 5,000 followers, which somehow explains the fact when we said at the beginning of some of the observation that fake news and hate speech, hate speakers, they generally have a large network of people. It explains that a little bit, even though we also see some examples of non hateful speakers here who also have 5,000 speakers. So maybe the hypothesis wasn't, is not, is not, from here, it's not visible from this graph. And then the second graph, it's like the number of posts per following. And we see that most people don't have a lot of posts. The most people, even those most people who associate those who were clustered into the hate bucket or bin or cluster, they do not have a huge number of posts by their followings. Not sure what that means, but this is just some statistics that they try to pull out from to explain the data set that they have. Now, to answer research question one, like exposure to hate speech versus non-hate speakers. The authors, they leveraged a Valin graph to make these connections. I had I had the exact statistics in my notes, but here I'm just gonna go very vaguely. It's everything. I think the scores that they had was less than 0.01, and we can see that from here the median number of posts. So the number of posts for hate speakers and non-hate speakers. Apologize for that. The number of posts for hate speakers and non-hate speakers here does not. We see that there's a little bit. Apologize for that. We see that there's just a slight difference between low credibility for the number of posts for hate speakers and non-hate speakers who are exposed to no credibility news, which really do not say much about the fact that hate speakers are more exposed to low credibility news. In conclusion, most people in general, either they're hate speakers or non-hate speakers, they're exposed to the same number of posts that have low credibility. But this is where everything changes. Is that despite, let's say, okay, I'm a hate speaker, you're a non-hate speaker, we're exposed to the same number of low credibility news. But then as a non-hate speaker, I'm exposed to a lot more high credibility news than you, which means at the end of the day, you are mostly exposed to to low credibility news. And this is what this graph tries to show. Like, we are all exposed to the same low credibility news, but then as a non-hate speaker, I have a high range of positive or high credibility news which come my way. And you, the hateful speaker, no. The second observation or the second research question, which had to do with now that we have hate speakers, what is the hate speakers with different targets? And by targets, we mean, remember in the description of a data set, we had like blacks, we had Jews, I don't even remember some of the demographics. We had like Latinos, we had Asians, and we had other demographics. So what is the relation? So what does this hate speaker, what is the frequency of the hate speech with different targets? And from this initial graph, from this first graph, we see that I am just going to be posting the results that I found interesting, that they really saw a huge change in them. The other ones were not very significantly, they were not very significantly, statistically significant. So for this one, they realize we can see here that it's a slight difference here. The ratio of low credibility posts for haters and non-haters for the Jewish population. But here it's a little more clear. We see that when we talk about the median number of posts for low credibility, we see that it is much higher low credibility news, there's a higher number of posts related targeting the Jews on low credibility news. And then the second graph, it shows something similar for Muslims. Like we see almost the same pattern for Muslim and the Jews. What does that mean? It means that the number of posts that are related to low credibility news are mostly those targeting either Jews or Muslims. I think they also found that for Latino, for the blacks, and for the Asian, it wasn't this. There was a little bit of increase, but it wasn't this flagrant like for the Jew and the Muslims. For the third research question is like exposure to popular fake news. What does popularity here mean? So I just want to set up the environment here for us to understand what does popularity in this context mean. Popular low credibility posts are posts that have a huge engagement. So you post something fake, you post something with a low credibility that is like fake or with a low credibility score, and then you get a lot of likes or retweets, or people tweet about it a lot. People engage with it a lot. That is a popular low credibility post. But an unpopular low credibility post is one that has less than 10 engagement. Like you post something that is fake, and then people don't engage much. People, they don't like much or they don't retweet much. That is just to say, this is just a little housekeeping for us to understand the next observations for this research question. And then what they realize is that when we talk about engagement, the ratio of posts with low credibility for hateful speakers is not that high. So, what does it mean exactly? It means that posts that had a low engagement, that people did not retweet much, also came from the hate speakers. But one way in which the but but a caveat to that is that if it is not retweeted much, then it is, if it's not retweeted, if there's not a lot of engagement there, that is likes and tweet, then there is very little to no fact checking on that, which means that there's not going to be a lot of engagement, but the people that are going to be looking at it will never know that it's actually a problem, because if it has low engagement, nobody's going to waste their time to fact check it. And on the other hand, we also see that for high engagement posts with low credibility, the hate speakers, they also had like a high engagement, but not as high as those with a low engagement. For the fourth research question, which is exposure to political fake news, is first we see that, so the way they broke up the research, the way they broke up political, I would say the political term in that is that they looked at from two different um, from two different angles. That is the far right or the slight right, or the slightly well, the far left or the slightly left, and the far right and the slightly right. So the way I can just easily just make it easy for us to understand is that, let's say, slight right or far right are those who are very much against immigration. They don't want people coming into their country. They are very conservative. They are very, while the far left and the slight left are those who are a little more on the social side, on the communist side. So that's how I would describe that. And then they realized that the ratio of low credibility posts, when we see for hateful speakers, they were like over the chart for people who are in the slightly right or far right political affiliation, more than those who are in the left. It's true, it is also high here. There's like I think a 1 to 5 relationship, but it is a little more important when we are in the far right or the slightly right political affiliation. So for the fourth question, which is exposure to political group but by affiliation group, well, exposure to political fake news, but by affiliation or by targeted group. What so what specific demographic does this political fake news mostly have an exposure to? And then once again, they had some results for Latino, Muslim, Asian, Blacks, and the Jew. And then they realized that when we look at the kind of news the kind of news that have low credibility score, and that target Latino, they are mostly from the right. Like, Latino are bad. We don't want them into our country. It's always about this immigration. Those people, us versus them. We don't want them. They are not the good people. And when we look at that, we also see the same for the Muslims. And I would believe, let's check out the next slide, that it would be the same for the blacks. Yeah, obviously. It's the same for blacks, but in this case, it is the same, and we look at it even from, and in this case, even the not hate speakers are not the majority here. It is just the far right, and they have a higher ratio of low credibility posts which are targeting the blacks. They are mostly from the far right political affiliation. A slight difference here is that we can see, actually here there's a little bit of a mix of both. We see, like, I think it's a 12-to-1 relationship here from the far left, of people who are more social, more communist, who believe that who have a higher ratio of low credibility posts, but that target the Jew. And we can see the same results as the Latino and the Muslim for the Asians. And what this really tells us is that it is also important to look at hate speech and fake news by demographics, because it's going to be easier to just study all of this under the same umbrella of humans, people using social media. But at the end of the day, when you look at this, you see it is not the same thing happening for blacks. It's not the same thing happening for Jew, and it's not the same thing happening for Asians. So looking at hate speech and fake news from different demographics can give us a lot more information on the traction or the way in which that has been spread in society, or how it's been, how it impacts society as a whole. So, some of the research limitation that the authors tried to put forward, and some that was also very fragrant to observe, was that it's the heavy reliance on Twitter data. The world, there's so much data out there. The fact that they really focus on Twitter data, it may not be representative of the diversity of the user behavior across various social media platforms. Some of us, so they had this very narrow Twitter data, which for most of us, let's say here in Africa, I don't think we engage more. We engage more on Twitter than maybe we do on WhatsApp or we do on other social media platforms. So that in itself also um, brings out a little bit of bias in the diversity of the kind of data that they had for this experiment, which at the end of the day also gave us some great perspective on different demographics. But it's also good to point out that it was just a one side kind of data set that was used for this experiment. The second limitation is the control group still includes hate speakers. You can never really pull them out. And you can really never have a control group that is very sterile. They believe that some of the control group still had some hate speakers in the group, which they could not filter out, which makes sense. The third limitation was primarily focused on the racism-related hate speech due to data availability, which I talked about earlier. Hate speech has so many different variety. It comes in very different variety, different flavors, different genres. Focusing only on racism, well, racism related hate speech may not give us a huge picture of what we are looking for, what we're trying to study. If we want to look at it, let's say from maybe from an African perspective, maybe racism may not be what we're focusing on. If we're looking from, I don't know, from a feminist perspective, racism may not be the main thing to give us the results that we're looking for. So focusing just on one genre here is true. The result is one step forward to explaining that, but it is not. It should be taken with a grain of salt, and then more experiments should be done on different on the different genres of hate speech to have um, a more global perspective of the hate speech in general. And then lastly, the use of content posts by followers by followed users as a proxy for exposure, that too also had some limitation. The fact that they just went with the account they could see, but most often some of the contents they could not scrub that. They used, I think at some point they used a random sampling of a few users, which that in itself also brings in add some additional bias into the data they used. And also there are so many other mechanisms through which people can be exposed to fake news. It is not always on Twitter. I can just open my computer and then I search for something, and then something really fake comes to my screen. That is another way of looking at it. Or even through recommendation. That may not always be that I followed someone and then they from what they were looking at, and then I got the fake news, and that's how I got exposed, and that's how I became a hateful speaker. So these are some of the caveat of the research of some of the limitations that they put forward, and that was also observed. My key takeaway from this research and my impression is that this study, I would have loved to see a causal relationship instead of just a correlation between hate speech and fake news. I know causality, for those who are in machine learning, causality is a huge, huge undertaking and something that's very difficult to prove in AI or in machine learning sphere. But I would have loved to see some kind of work if they're talking about synergistic relationship between hate speech and fake news. I would have loved to see a little bit of a causal link, like what causes the other, maybe research going into that direction. I would have loved that, but it's just a personal preference because that's something I'm studying. And then secondly, the fact that hate speakers may choose to engage with low credibility content. That too for me. It also makes sense that they may also choose to engage with low credibility content because that is where they feel comfortable. That is where they can engage with their followers the most. If they keep posting hate speakers and then they have this huge following group, well, if they keep posting low credibility content and then they have this huge following group, then maybe that's just where they like to be. They just like to be posting this kind of thing because they're going to keep the followers engaged, and maybe they think that's what their followers like. So that also is a possibility for them being not wanting to post about high credibility content. My impression about this paper is that I was happy to see some active research in this direction. When I started working on this for my literature review paper in 2023, last year, There was basically no active research studying the relationship between fake news and hate speech. And I was very happy when I was revising that paper this year in the summer, in the from May to September. I saw that there were at least four papers, four researchers that were actively looking at this direction. And then it made me, well, I was happy about that. And then this is a difficult paper. It's a bit of a difficult paper if you are not familiar with statistics and dialing plots and reading statistical graphs and everything. So I had to brush up a little bit on my statistics, graph, and plot in order to better understand the kind of results that they had here, and better analyze some of the observation and the experimentation that was made in this paper. So with that, I thank you so much, Masakne, like I say, my village, for listening to the end, and I appreciate your understand. Well, I appreciate you listening to the end and being invited to give this talk. And the floor is open for any question that anybody may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikel. Thank you for this nice presentation. Uh,
Mm.
there are some reactions online, so I will just go through them from the beginning, and then people who posted can also add additional follow-ups. So, hi everyone online. So I will start with Naomi uh, Wamba. She said I will ask her to clarify something because she said she is. I do not completely agree with point number two. So what is the point number two that she was talking about? If she can, I just making sure uh, if that's the case. Naomi, can you specify which number two, and what didn't you agree with, so she can comment on it? Otherwise, I will go to your next question. Um, just waiting on her. Okay, then that's the first comment. But she actually has a question then that is, how did they get access to demographic data? Isn't this
Interesting.
personal data? Okay, that's
Yes, that
one.
is exactly the question that I asked. But the thing is, they did not release the data, and they don't tell us anything about the kind of data that they have. That generally should have an IRB approved or some kind of institutional review board on that. And that is one of the caveat that I forgot to put forward when I was looking at the limitation is how did they get the data? How did they process the demographics, and how did they that's person, and they said nothing about that. They said nothing about, what kind of anonymity, well, not anonymous, well, what kind of, how did they make the data, how did they anonymize the data? They didn't say anything about it. So that is one thing, that is a very good observation.
Okay. Uh, Still about that, I could understand the demographics. You could, assuming you have access to that somewhere. I'm more curious about like the political affiliations. How do you get that information? What do you think? Is it something they inferred from maybe information, or you think they studied? Because I'm also curious about that part. Because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but um,
So let me go back to this slide and let me go back here. So the good thing about NewsGuard is that when it gives you a credibility threshold, I think it also labels the data uh, into this is politically far right, this is politically far left. This article talks about news that so the news guide is mostly political news, everything that has to do with political news that is from democratic or republican or whatever political affiliation. That is where news guide is, and they try to label each article that comes out from each of those affiliation and put them on the specific bin. Let's say, okay, this is democratic group affiliation paper. It is very fake, so I'm going to give it a score of 20%. And then, so when you take that paper, you know, this is a fake news article from a slightly far right or a very far right paper. So I know what to do about it. So I think they got that from the news guard.
All right. All right. Yeah. So Naomi did specify what she meant by point two. So she said she didn't agree with there is no such thing as a serial hater. Can you comment about that?
Yeah. Yeah, that is totally true. That's why when I made that comment, I was like, well, from what they are saying, they say research has shown that there is no such thing as a serial hater. That's what they say, even though, like I said, some people may disagree with that. Some people may not agree that there is no such. There's some people may agree that, well, there's some people who are there, all they do every day, all day, 24/7, is to talk about hate, to just hate on people. So I take that with a little grain of salt. I take that point with a little grain of salt.
All right. Um, then I'll go to the next ones. Futse, a question. She asked the relationship made between hate speech and fake news. Can't it be affected by the recommendation algorithm on the social platform?
Yeah, so that is also one of the research gap that came out from the work that I did, was that it's important to look at all these things, from, let's say, hate speech. This person is a hate speaker. This person is not a hate speaker, but it's also important to look at it from the recommendation systems that our social media. Because if you look at TikTok, whatever, sometimes it's just the bad things that get recommended to some people, but whatever that recommender system thinks that you may like, it may be something that may be fake or a hateful language or something that is a social incivility. But whatever the recommendation system picks up as something that may be of interest to the user, they would just keep pumping that until, and that's another form of exposure to fake news, and then pushing people to be hateful speakers. So that is a research gap. That is an active research question that somebody, if they want to be looking into their PhD, they can explore that. But that is a good point.
Mm. I was curious. I realized I missed some comments, but I'll come back to it. Still on that
Mhm.
recommendation part, what is it about fake news that makes it sense? I mean, that makes it more like appealing, or because it spreads more probably. And I'm wondering if is it just because it's fake, or there's something about how it is on these platforms also that it makes it more engaging or something.
Yeah, so what I found out was that there is generally, most often, there is derogatory language in fake news story, and they generally have this strong emotional thing that they add to it that will just push you to want to open it. Because if the story is fake, it's gonna be something like, uh, the fake news spreader, they get really good at it. They either repeat something so many times, but changing few things on it. They're gonna do it so many times that you're gonna really want to get it open, or they're gonna attach something emotionally attractive to it, to make it in such a way that you have no choice. You really want to engage with it because it has touched you at the deepest of your core. It makes sure that I want to open it. So those are the two things that I think that I have. Most of that some of the papers that I've looked into, they pick out as some of the things that make people, this fake news story so appealing to everyone.
All right.
Mhm.
Um, I'll go to Naomi commented on her previous comment. So she said, "I have seen people online who like a specific like a specific agenda. I've seen this on misogyny, for example, people, especially men, who constantly and even paid lessons on how to mistreat women." So yeah, it's just I think." she wanted to make the point that actually there are people who
Yeah, serial
on
haters.
daily basis have an agenda, and I think I'm curious about the conclusion they made about that, and like, is it more? I mean, I'm not sure if it's a conclusion or hypothesis, or
Mhm.
what was it? That point on serial haters. Was it a
No,
hypothesis
no.
of your work, or
Yeah, it was a
conclusion
hypothesis. It was
on the?
something. Yeah, it was a hypothesis. That's something to keep in mind why we're doing this research. Like, this is something that we came across from recent research, and that we want to know. This is going to be something to keep in mind as you read our paper, or something we keep in mind as we do our experimentation. Like, maybe hate speakers have the evasive profiles. Maybe it's something to keep in mind. There is also no such thing as a serial hater. That's also something to keep in mind. So I think they were just setting the pace. Like, generally, when you're doing your research, what has been done? What are some of the observation that can relate to your paper? So I think that is something that they wanted to us to keep in mind. Like, there's no such thing as a hater. I think it's also a bit of a caveat to say, well, we are studying this thing, but we are also want to to bring your attention to the fact that, yeah, there's no such thing as somebody who does that for a living, who just wants to do that. But also, at the end of the day, is what research shows. So there's something in math called counter narrative. If you can find a counter example to that, then you have a counter narrative. So yeah. No, counter negative. Count, is it counter negative? Yeah.
Okay. Um, Maybe I show Nami's last comment on this one. Now, with the blue tick on Twitter, hate speech, especially when it's triggering, is used a lot by people to make money. Probably
Exactly.
there, so yeah, probably.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. Exactly what we were saying. They add some emotional thing to it to get more people to engage with it, and then they get some money out of it. So
Okay.
that's why it's important to study that. That's another reason why it's important to study, and then make sure that we have guardrails in place to make to ensure people like that don't get money out of, causing pain, spreading fake news that may incite violence, either online or offline in the future. Yeah, or in the present.
All right. Uh, a question from Honore. Credible
Yeah.
sources like government have also a past of outputting incorrect news.
Yep.
Could this explain the surge acceptance of low credible sources?
Exactly. I started up with the chart to show you how fake news detection and hate speech detection, how it just took off. It took off based on the 2016 US election. People weren't talking more about it. People were just doing the simple research, but then it's after one of the powerful government, well, one of the powerful government bodies, institution in the world started talking, really putting out the biggest misinformation out there, that people started paying attention. So yeah, fake news and hate speech is not only for people on Twitter or on social media, but it affects us all, government, non-government, even the you, because at this point now, when you get something on WhatsApp or your social media, you really don't know if it's true or not. And then I think even ChatGPT now has started, since it's currently powered by the web, or has also started, spewing some of the things without fact checking them. So we don't know. That's why this is a fascinating area of research. And yeah.
I think that's an interesting point, because it say, like, basically Honor is saying that probably if you look at the source, and if you see that the source is the government, and you just accept it, it might be like misleading somehow. It's like you just it's like saying you don't just say who says it, but it's kind of, you have to fact check if it's not just the authority that Crazy. Before going on, you mentioned ChatGPT. So I had something question about that actually. What do you think is the role of AI into that? Whether in the participating in that or in helping mitigate that? Where AI in general, not only the generative.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I would say, from the explainability perspective, being able to look at some news, like I think Honore pointed to that, saying that how do we know that some of this news is correct? How do we know? It starts with knowing how this model make the decision. Like when we have this fake news and we have this hate speech detector, what are some of the markers in the text or in the image for those doing multimodal learning? What are some of the markers that push the model to make a specific decision? When you know that, you can build better detectors that can actually explain it to governments, or you can build better detectors that can explain it to everyone. And then now, when people have some kind of information online, it can be easier for them to know, well, there's you have a detector for that and for hate speech and fake news, but you also know why the detector made a specific prediction, like this is fake or this is not fake. And with that, the government's going to be. I think there's for those in Europe, the GDPR. I think GDPR that is mainly. I don't remember the name exactly. The government. I don't
The
remember
general data protection law.
exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah, that is. I think that is something that they're trying to put into the background. Like everything we do about with this AI things, if we're trying to build a fake news detection system or we're trying to build a hate speech detection system, we really want to know how this how these systems are making the decision. So, from an AI perspective, how we can help with that is first understand why, not just rely on, like somebody said, not just rely on the government saying something and believing that it's true. We are building these detectors. What if the detectors are not? How do we know that they're actually saying the right thing? Building explainable systems that can tell us what is that thing that pushed the model to make the specific decision or to make a specific prediction or outcome. And from there, once we know that, we can, I would say, think about reverse engineer it, and then build better models that would, I don't know, that would better help tackle these social instabilities. I hope that answered the question. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. It's definitely there is some role to play there to like make sure we detect those, and then if the detections are really accurate. But there is a point that I want to come back. I don't want to put you on spotlight, but what about the part where what do you think about the percentage of fake news that is AI generated, or how do you think, because there is detecting fake news versus accurate news, I guess, but there's also the question of
Mhm.
what information is generated by an AI, and what do you think
Yes.
is that is the threat of having all these AI generated, and then the potential of AI helping this. How do you balance? Where do you put the balance? Where do you lean?
Yes. That is actually a really, really good question. Um, this AI or this ChatGPT or this, let's say, large language models, they are trained from content from the internet. Content from the internet come from humans. Humans are inherently biased. So, the systems that are built from content emanating from humans on social media or on the internet used to build this ChatGPT or these large language models will probably also be inherently biased. And we have seen instances of that on Google Palm. The PALM, I think is it Google or Meta? I think it's Google, the Google Palm. There's this paper that came out in 2024 from Duta and all. I don't remember the title of the paper, but if I find it, I'm going to share with you. It's on how Google Palm, you can prompt Google Palm to give you something fake or toxicity, something toxic actually. So you can prompt it to fill in the blanks, and then you can just, I don't know, for those familiar with prompting or prompt engineer, you prompt it in a specific way and it's going to give you the most outrageous, hateful language. So at the end of the day, and I've also seen, so that's something that I'm also working on. I've also seen a lot of research traction on the fact that, yeah, now that we have this chat GPT, we have these beautiful large language models, maybe we can use them to explain specific text. Like if we have a hateful language, we give it to the GPT model or the large language model, and it can be able to tell us that, well, I think that this is fake or this is hate because of this, because of this, because of this. But the little caveat on that is nobody even understands how these large language models work. You are using something you don't understand how it works to help you explain something for you to understand how that thing is actually a fake news or hate speech, which is a new debate that I'm seeing in scholarly articles and people saying that, yeah, let's use large language model for explainability to explain these phenomena in society when we don't even understand the inner workings of this large language system. So it's a bit of but yeah, you are right. There are so many instances of these AI systems or these language model systems, like the Palm 2. I think you can just have Palm 2 toxicity, hateful language toxicity, and then you're going to fall on that paper. It's a pretty recent paper, I think 2024. And then you're going to see how they did that. And that's not the only paper. There's so many other papers that look into these large language models and try to pinpoint fake news or hate speech. Because at the end of the day, they were trained by data from humans who are inherently biased.
All right. I think there's a lot to say about this, and something we can all agree on is that although large language models and all these models are very powerful for a lot of tasks,
Mhm.
they definitely not the things to use for fact checking, right?
Nah.
Because they can't give facts; they just give like statistically meaningful things. Okay, I don't know. Let me go to the next item. Say, how do we ensure, Honore, say, how do we ensure integrity of the content capturing us humans against one we generated? Uh, for example, am I really seeing you with a lion tooth on your neck? I don't. I'm not sure I get that question. Let me read that again. How do we ensure integrity of the content capturing us humans against one we generated?
So, how do we ensure the integrity of the content that we are capturing online against what we are actually seeing? Is that the question?
Um, Maybe he can. I don't know. Uh, yeah, I think I, I will ask Honore to specify his question, and yeah, and then I will just move to next comment. Futse says contents on the internet are also now generated by AI, which most of the time amplifies the biases. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And says I'm wondering how stance detection, bias detection, and fake news detection differ. Hmm.
So this is also a very active research. I read a paper recently. I think it was the New York. It was a very important news outlet that showed that from 2022 to now, the percentage of news article generated online by bots, by the Latin language bots and everything grew by 530%. So Futsa, you're not wrong in that aspect, and that actually just makes the problem a little more difficult because now we don't know what content is generated by humans and what content is generated by bots or by large language models powered robots, language bots. And that just makes everything so complex. Now you don't know what you're reading online. Is it generated by human? And if it's generated by human, then maybe you have hopes of easily detecting incivilities in them. But when it's generated by robots who know that there are the people actively working to detect this hateful language, maybe they may do a workaround. So that is a very active research question and research direction, and that is why explainability is study of social incivilities like this is, in my opinion, uh, very fascinating.
Okay. Next, Ariane Jebna says, thanks for the amazing presentation. This is Mikel. This is an interesting topic. Yeah, it's indeed a very interesting topic. Um, um, Naomi says, presidential election are coming up in Cameroon next year,
Ah,
2025. Usually, pre-electoral and post-electoral periods comes with a lot of fake news and hate speech, mostly on tribalism.
mm,
And I think you said
mm.
the data was collected in the context of presidential elections in the US also, right? The study in this paper, or
No. So the study, it was collected from Twitter, and some of the I think it was the post credibility were actually here. The post credibility, yeah, they were gotten from news article that have political affiliation, and they were matched and they were classified, I would say, from NewsGuard, from the NewsGuard threshold, credibility threshold. So it's not, the data set is not collected from presidential election, but the growth of hate speech over the past couple years grew exponentially. The of fake news, the term fake news, the use of terminology, or the use of or the increase in fake news grew exponentially during the 2016 U.S. presidential election.
okay. And then she follows up by saying, how can your research and KmerAI help to detect these automatically and flag them on social media platform, please?
So that's something I'm still trying to explore. I'm trying to look at it from an explainable AI perspective. As you may have picked up, I talked a little bit about it. But that is something that I'm really trying to explore, and not only explore it into, okay, how are we going to build the system? How are we going to make sure that we can detect hate speech and fake news? But also, how do we know? So the more we know about the relationship between fake news and hate speech, it can make it easier for us to build systems that can detect the kind of hate speech that may incite the kind of fake news that may incite hate speech. Because we saw earlier that there is possibly a relationship, but there's an interconnectedness from scholarly articles, and we also saw from this paper that increase that hate speakers may be influenced by increase in fake news exposure. So, knowing that relationship can help us craft better ways to detect them, not only detect them, but also detect instances where we feel like these specific fake news, maybe from the way it is being spread online, can cause political unrest, or it can lead to hateful language or hateful or just hate offline. So understanding that synergy, that is what I'm trying to do, and then maybe from there, I believe that doing research to understand first the concept, and then once we understand the concept, what can we build for that concept that can help solve a specific social problem. So that's how I see this research going, but there's still a lot of work to be done here, and it's active because people get smarter every day on how they craft the fake news or they craft the hate speech to evade detection. So this is going to be a continuous problem that a lot of people are going to have to put their brains together and devise better ways to detect them and outsmart the smart people in quote.
All right. Basically, said there is some understanding to have more about it before even like just throwing a detector. Like there's how these all the factors that play come into play into that, right?
Mm,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um, um, and feel free to add additional questions. So Honore added a clarification to his question. So I think he was asking, how do we know a picture or a video of Mikel against a picture or video generated that looks like Mikel? So it's more about like how do we still about how do we detect fake, I mean AI generated versus um, like real content, I guess. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah,
um,
that is going to be a huge question. I think that's a huge question and something that is actively being researched in the computer vision sphere. I think from the deep fake, from the growth of deep fake, where everybody is trying, you can look at the picture today and you have no clue if it actually happened or it's something that was fabricated in. I think we had examples of that. We had example. I don't know if you if any of you are Swifties, Taylor Swift. I like Taylor Swift. And then there was this picture of her a couple months ago going through the internet when it wasn't actually her. It was a deep fake of her. And then so that's like I said, those are very active research areas um, that just keep getting smarter as better and smarter detectors are being built. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I work a bit in the area of the security of models, so I know that it's a very active research and there's nothing. So there's always this game of you bring detectors and people always outsmart it. So
yeah.
there's
Mhm.
uh, I think there's a recent research from Google that was published in Nature. I forgot the name, but you can check it out. I think one of the authors is. Demise from Nobel Prize winner. So about how you detect is exactly about how you can detect the LLM generated content. And
Mm,
this,
ah,
yeah, I think yeah I saw it somewhere. If I forgot the title, but I invite you to check it. I mean to search more on it. So AI is
thank
improving, and so I think it will become impossible for humans to know without using metadata. I can say it quickly that if we add metadata, how do you ensure that metadata is not also corrupted? So I think it's kind of very complex question. Also, what do you think?
yeah. Yeah, I think it's a chicken and egg problem. If sometimes the metadata can help with, like here they had some metadata, but they cannot really tell us what it looks like or how they collected it. But at the same time too, like you said, the metadata could be corrupted, and they may not even, if they are corrected, they will not be very useful for the research because they are already they have some inherent bias to it. So yeah, it's a complex problem. That is why there is an institutional review board that would always want to know what kind of data you're collecting, how you're collecting it, and what kind of people is going to be impacted by the data you're collecting. That is an important phase for every researcher to go through, especially if you're going to be one working on sensitive data or data that may hurt or impact a specific population a specific way. So yeah, it depends, and that's also the reason why that it's important. That's also the reason why it is said in the machine learning life cycle that data collection And data preprocessing are the hardest and the most time consuming because you really, if you want to build systems that are impactful, that are transparent, that are not biased, that are ethical, that are responsible, then you have to put all that into perspective from the get go. That is from the data collection um, step or phase. Make sure that that is really solid, even though it can never be 100% solid because humans are inherently biased. But at least when you have those safeguards in place, you at least know that this data is was collected in an ethical fashion. We believe it's responsible. We believe would not harm the population. We believe that it is a little bit representative of the population that we're trying to study, and we can move from there. So yeah, chicken and egg problem. You can have a metadata. When you have it, it may inform your model, it may inform your decision, it may inform the outcome of the experiment that you're trying to have. But if you also did not collect it the right way, that information may not be accurate to the experiment that you're trying to carry out. And it may, at the end of the day, even harm your research.
Right. So I just posted the title. I found the title of the paper: Scalable Watermarking for Identifying Large Language Model Outputs. Feel free to check it out. Um, Honore says, any projections about humans interactions? I mean, how will look? How will human interactions look? Human interactions look? I think that's what.
So that is something that is getting trickier and trickier every day. As more people interact more digitally than they do in person. Um, but that is something that we're gonna have to wait and see. Um, I don't know. Nobody knows, especially with the advent of this social media and artificial intelligence. A lot of people are now connecting more digitally than they did human to human. So that is something that we're gonna have to wait and see how. Yeah.
All right. Um, there's what maybe we can come back to the research. So let's say that ask a question at the beginning that I missed is that is the study trying to analyze the psychological effect that fake news has on hate speech? Maybe she already has.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Is the study trying to analyze the psychological effect that fake news has on hate speech?
No, it doesn't do that. It just tries to look at the relationship of how fake news, of how hate speakers, the relationship between hate speakers and their exposure to fake news. Like, am I a hate speaker because I have a lot of followers who post about fake news, and then because I ingest a lot of fake news every day, that makes me a hate speaker. That's mostly what the paper tries to talk about.
Mm. So there was a like about the research about the limitations. There's one part that I was curious about. You said that they limited to 5,000 followers. That is the limit that
Hmm.
the the social network or Twitter then allowed, for instance, for scrapping. I'm wondering
Hmm.
how. I'm wondering if that's not a limitation in the sense that which if someone has can have a lot of followers, like maybe let's say 10,000 followers. I mean, boys, and then you have of this following uh, more people. How do you select the ones that you choose? If you don't, even they let out, how do they ensure that they didn't let out some of these? I think this might be uh,
The limitation,
to
possibly, yeah.
right. Um. Oh, no more comments. Just one more. Come on, maybe I don't know what he means, or because the previous question was on the human interaction. So, you, uh, Honore, can you write some? Uh, I didn't get what you said, but yeah. Thanks a lot. I missed probably some of the application comments from, but it was a really interesting. It's an interesting topic and quite interesting presentation. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, let's. Honestly, it's okay. Yeah. I don't know how much time you have more, so we just. I'll just maybe say a bit. Let's see if people have more questions. We can talk about this for
I
hours.
actually have to,
Sure. Yeah.
no, I actually have to go
Yeah, yeah,
now.
yeah. Sure, sure, sure. So yeah. Say the topic is vast indeed. Yeah, relevant and interesting. Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure. Thank you everyone who participated, and thank you so much, Mikel, for staying 1 hour and almost 30 minutes with us. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me. Thanks
Time
for
for
having me.
yeah, welcome. Thank you, and see you.
Bye.
For bye.
See you. Bye.